But this is a pretty remarkable retreat by the British, isn't it? Effectively, having been saying maybe no transition at all, we're staying in the EU for another 2 years to all intents and purposes.
I think if you are kind, you would say that the Prime Minister has made a generous offer and has now put it to the Europeans to respond. If you would unkind, you would say there's been a series of concessions whilst the European Union has not made a single concession.
Right. I mean, this morning, Chris Grayling said on Radio 4, we've been very clear, freedom of movement ends in 2019. He said that this morning. He had read the speech and he said that this morning. In the speech, the Prime Minister says during the implementation period, people will continue to be able to come and live and work in the UK. In what way is that not free movement?
Well, I have three concerns about the speech. The first is free movement, which ought to end at the end of March 2019. And I think it's a question about the Home Office's competence, actually, because it hasn't done very well in dealing with illegal immigrants so far. And the question for the Home Office is, can it be ready in time to do the job properly? And I think it ought to be, and I think that's a challenge for the Home Secretary. The other area I'm concerned about is that we should be promising money before we know the other side of the deal. They want money, we want trade, and for us to be guaranteeing money, which the speech practically does so early on, concerns me considerably. Right. And the third point that concerns me is that it hasn't been made clear whether in this implementation period we will still be subject to the European Court of Justice. To my mind, that is an absolutely red line. If after March 2019 we are still subject to the ECJ, we have not left the European Union, and that would be undermining the vote we had in June of 2016.
The European Union is absolutely clear. We're still under the European Court of Justice in the implementation period. There's not even a shimmer of doubt about that. So you can't actually accept what the Prime Minister has set out today.
The Prime Minister didn't make that clear in her speech, but is a point that needs to be clarified. If we do not come out of the jurisdiction of the ECJ, we have not left the European Union, and that would be a denial of the vote, the biggest vote in British history that we had in June of 2013. So that is a key question that I hope journalists will be asking the Prime Minister, and parliamentarians will, when the House of Commons is back after the conference recess.
What can you do? What would you do if it seems like the Prime Minister, as everybody else is interpreting it, that we do have the ECJ, we do make the payments, and we do have free movement for 2 more years? What can you do to stop it?
Well, I can't do anything to stop it. I'm one of 650 members of Parliament, but there will be a considerable dissatisfaction in the country if we are not outside the ECJ's jurisdiction on the date of leaving, and that is crucially important. We've had a huge democratic vote. This needs to be implemented, and the government must ensure that it can do the administrative job of getting us ready, to be ready on day one.
I mean, the other thing the Prime Minister did do today, which was a concession, was she effectively abandoned talk of, hey, look, if you give us a bad deal, we'll go down the route of being a kind of Singapore, offshore Europe, we'll have deregulation. She said, no, we won't do that. She said, we're keen on high levels of regulation, just like the rest of Europe. Does that upset you?
Well, I think that's a separate question, actually. She did reiterate the point that no deal is better than a bad deal, and that's important. What happens once we've left and have properly left about future economic policy will be determined by our normal democratic processes, and that there are many people in the Conservative Party who would prefer a more Thatcherite approach to economics. And if that's what the country votes for, that's what it will get. But with Parliament as it's currently made up, that's not a realistic option anyway. There aren't the votes for that in the House of Commons, and so the Prime Minister is reflecting reality in saying that.
Do you ever think that the Brexiteers, with a much harder line view of what this negotiation should be like, no money, no ECJ, no free movement, you've led her up a path which she basically doesn't feel is deliverable? This is why, after 6 months of saying, she could have done this 6 months ago, nothing's changed, except she's just given in to the reality that the Europeans are not going to let us have our cake and eat it.
No, I dispute that. I think the risk of delay is that we miss out on the opportunities of Brexit coming to the country sooner. I was so impressed by Boris Johnson's article a week ago or so, which set out the really positive argument for Brexit about how with free trade we can be more prosperous, that we can cut the cost of living for everybody in society, but in food, clothing and footwear most, which affects the poorest in society most, we can improve their standard of living, we can boost real wages once we're outside the containment of the European Union. This is very exciting, and delaying it is inevitably disappointing.
Theresa May has heard all those arguments, and yet today she has basically said, I'm sorry guys, I have to make this transitional plan. It's not going to work to have this cliff edge.
Well, I don't think there's any necessity for a cliff edge. I think if the government could be ready on day one, if it read the excellent articles by Charles Elphicke on Conservative Home and ensured that the governmental systems were prepared, I think this is a real challenge for our civil service to make sure that they can get the work done, to make sure government departments are ready, so Customs and Excise are ready, that the Home Office is ready. That's the essence of it, and that's not a cliff edge.